Welcome to Rain Narrator channel where we take you on a journey of deep relaxation and complete tranquility with the sound of raindrops adding an atmosphere of tranquility and comfort. Relax, enjoy, and prepare to enter the world of dreams. If you are looking for an ideal way to relax or calm your mind before sleep, you are in the right place. Follow us to get the best stories. You know, it's funny how life works. You never expect it to change so quickly, yet it does, often when you're not even looking for it. I didn't expect my world to shift, but then she came along and everything seemed to fall into place and, at the same time, fall apart. It all started during the summer before my final year of high school. I was sitting at the edge of the football field, my feet dangling over the side, staring at the horizon. It was one of those days when the air felt thick and heavy, like the world was holding its breath. I didn't really know what I was waiting for. Maybe I was just tired of everything. The same faces, the same routine. I had this feeling that I was on the edge of something, but I couldn't tell what. That's when she walked by. I don't know how I noticed her at first. She wasn't anything extraordinary in the way that she stood out from the crowd, but there was something about her. She had this soft glow, like the sunlight was warmer when she moved under it. Her hair was wild, like the breeze couldn't leave it alone, and her eyes were like something I'd only ever seen in dreams. Bright, curious, yet there was a sadness in them. Too, like she was searching for something but couldn't find it. I didn't even realize I was staring until she caught me looking. I immediately turned away, embarrassed, but she didn't laugh or make me feel bad. She just smiled like she knew something I didn't. Her name was Clara. It didn't take long for us to start talking, just small things at first. I was surprised she'd even pay attention to a guy like me. I wasn't anything special, but there was something in her eyes that made me want to be someone better. Someone she could look at without that sadness. I figured I'd just say a few words. A polite hey, but somehow we kept talking. The conversations didn't make sense at first. Just idle chatter about the weather or random thoughts. But there was a kind of energy between us that felt different from anything I'd ever known. Like we were connected in some way, even if we didn't understand it yet. As the days passed, I learned that she was going through a change of her own. Her family was moving to the other side of the country, to a place that felt as foreign to her as it did to me. And I understood that feeling, that sense of having your whole world uprooted and replaced with something you couldn't control. It was the same for me. My parents were getting a divorce and I had to leave my childhood home. I didn't even know where I was going to live next year. But Clara, she understood. I don't know why, but it felt like we both carried the same weight. We were both standing on the edge of something, but we didn't know what would happen if we fell. One night, under the wide expanse of stars, we sat on the hood of my old car. The night was thick with silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. She spoke about her parents, how they'd decided to separate everything. Her mother staying in one place, her father going to another city. She was being torn between two different versions of what her life could be, and I could see the fear in her face. I wanted to tell her that it would be okay, that somehow we'd both figure things out, but I didn't have the right words. Instead, I told her that I was scared too. Scared of losing everything. Scared of what was going to come next, when everything I thought I knew was suddenly crumbling around me. Her hand brushed mine just for a second, but it was enough to make me realize how much I wanted to hold on to something, to hold on to her. The weeks passed and everything around us seemed to be spiraling. My parents were more distant, consumed by their own things, and I found myself falling into a rhythm of avoiding everyone. But Clara was different. She had this way of making everything seem like it mattered. She had a way of seeing me for who I was. Before all the brokenness and mess that had become my life, I found myself falling for her. More and more with each passing day, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her. She had her own battles to fight, and I couldn't risk adding mine into her world. She was so fragile in her own way, but so strong too. And yet, it wasn't long before we found ourselves standing on the edge together, holding on to each other, both knowing that something big was coming for us. The last night we spent together was one I'll never forget. It wasn't anything extraordinary, just the two of us sitting on the steps of a small park. The crickets sang their usual song and the moon hung low in the sky. She was leaving the next day, and I knew this was our last moment before everything changed. "I don't want to go," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't want you to go either," I said, my throat tight. She smiled softly, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "I think we were always going to leave, but maybe that's how it's supposed to be." Maybe the things we care about the most aren't meant to last forever. I didn't know what to say to that. Maybe she was right, but part of me couldn't accept it. I wanted us to stay in this moment forever, where nothing had to change. But life doesn't work that way. The next morning, she was gone. I watched her leave, standing on the side of the road, waving as the car pulled away. There was a lump in my throat, and I could feel something heavy in my chest. The months that followed were difficult. I graduated without her, went through the motions, pretending I didn't feel like something was missing. And sometimes when I thought back to that summer, I wondered if it had all been a dream. If maybe it was just a fleeting moment in time that was never meant to last. But every now and then, when I find myself standing on the edge of something, uncertain of what the future holds, I can still feel her beside me. And in those moments, I realize that the change we went through wasn't just about the end of something, but the beginning of something new. A beginning that in some strange way we had already started together, even if it wasn't forever. So that's how it ended. Not with a grand gesture, not with a kiss that solved everything, but with a quiet understanding that sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about letting go, knowing that even when you part ways, you carry something of each other with you for Eve. It was a simple enough beginning, one I couldn't have predicted would turn into this. At first, I was just a guy trying to find something real. Like everyone, I had been in relationships before, but they always seemed to slip away somehow. Either I wasn't ready or she wasn't, or life just happened in ways we couldn't control. I had learned to accept the fleeting nature of love, but then she walked into my life. It felt like everything just clicked into place. From the very first moment, I knew there was something special about her. Her smile, it wasn't just a smile. It was a spark, a warmth that spread through me every time she flashed it. The way she spoke, how she made even the most mundane things sound so magical. And the way she made me feel like I mattered, like I was worth something, filled a void I didn't even know I had. For the first time, I felt seen. In the beginning, I would have done anything for her. I thought it was just natural. When you're with someone who makes you feel this way, you want to be everything they need. I didn't mind. I didn't question it. I just wanted to make her happy. I loved everything about her, her quirks, her laugh, the way she would bury her face in her hands when she was nervous, how she always seemed to know what I was thinking before I even said a word. But as the months passed, little things began to change. At first, they were barely noticeable. A small offhand comment here, a distant look there. It wasn't enough to make me stop and think, but it was enough to make me wonder, deep down, if I was still the same to her. Was I still the one she wanted? Or had I become just a part of her routine, a companion, a placeholder for whatever she needed at the moment? Then came the day it all started to unravel. She'd always had a group of friends who were a bit different. I'd never questioned them much. It wasn't my place to judge who she spent time with. But one evening, she invited me to a gathering at one of their houses. I was excited, eager to show her how much I cared, hoping to be accepted by the people who were part of her world. But what I didn't expect was the cold reception I received. Her friends didn't really acknowledge me, and when they did, it was with a sort of pity in their eyes. It stung more than I care to admit, but I brushed it off. Maybe they were just a little distant because they didn't know me well enough. After all, she had just introduced me to them. But that night, as we were leaving, something changed in her eyes. It was subtle, just a flicker of something that made my heart sink. The warmth she always showed me seemed to cool for a split second, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just losing her attention, but losing her altogether. Over the next few weeks, I found myself growing restless. I tried to talk to her about it, but she would always dismiss my concerns, telling me I was overthinking it. It was typical for her to deflect. At first, I accepted it. After all, she had her own life, her own space, and I didn't want to crowd her. But soon I began to realize that these weren't just normal relationship bumps. Something was wrong, something deeper. And I could feel the shift in her that she was either too blind or too careful to admit. And then one night, everything changed. I had been working late, and I came back to her apartment earlier than expected. As I opened the door, I heard voices, her voice and another man's. They weren't speaking softly, as though trying to be discreet. No, this was a conversation, loud, clear, and passionate. I don't know what exactly drove me to peek around the corner, but I saw them. She was sitting on the couch, laughing, And the man. He was sitting much too close to her, his hand brushing against hers in a way that made my stomach turn. They weren't just friends. This wasn't just innocent. The look in their eyes, no, it wasn't just familiarity. It was love. I saw it and I felt like the ground beneath me was pulled out from under me. I couldn't stand there anymore. I had to leave, and I did. I didn't let her see me. I didn't know what to do with what I had just witnessed. My heart shattered in an instant, but I didn't show it. I couldn't. Instead, I pretended like I hadn't seen anything, like I hadn't understood everything that had just happened. For the next few days, I kept up the charade. I didn't confront her. I couldn't. Instead, I became someone else, someone who wasn't broken. I began to disguise my feelings, put on a mask. I became detached, acting like I didn't care, like I was perfectly fine with whatever this was, even though inside it was killing me. I wasn't the person who had been madly in love with her anymore. I was playing a part now just as much as she was. I spent hours reflecting, realizing that I wasn't even angry. I wasn't angry at her or him or even at myself. What hurt the most was the realization that I had been a pawn in a game I didn't even know I was part of. She had always made it seem like we were in this together, like I was her choice, her partner, but in reality, I had been nothing more than a tool for her game of love. She had never truly loved me, not in the way I loved her. To her, I was simply someone she could rely on for comfort, someone who would always be there when she needed it, and someone who wouldn't ask questions. I was part of her routine, part of a larger game she was playing, but I wasn't the one she truly cared about. And now I had to figure out what I meant to myself. I couldn't just let myself stay the fool. So I shifted. I became someone different, someone detached, someone who no longer needed her validation. I told myself that I didn't care anymore, that I was moving on. And in some ways I believed that. But in the deepest corners of my heart, I still loved her. It was only after the truth came out, after she tried to apologize, after the games had all been revealed, that I realized I had to let go. Not because I wasn't capable of loving her, but because I had finally understood that love, for me, was never supposed to be a game. It was supposed to be real, shared between two people who were both giving, both honest. And so I left, not just physically, but emotionally. I walked away from the love I had given with all my sincerity. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but it was the only thing that truly felt right. I couldn't keep pretending that I was a part of something that was never meant to be. I didn't need to win her back. I needed to win back myself. And that's the journey I'm still on, even now. The person I once was, who loved her so purely, so completely, had to fade away, so I could finally start loving myself again. It all started a little over a year ago, in a way I never expected. I was scrolling through social media, just killing time when I came across her profile. Her name was Lily. She had this beautiful, infectious smile in her pictures, and there was something about her energy that drew me in. I wasn't expecting anything serious, honestly. I had just come out of a messy breakup, and I wasn't looking for love or anything like it. But she seemed different, so I sent her a message. To my surprise, she responded right away. We started talking, and it was like we just clicked. There was something so easy about the way we communicated. She was witty, charming, and had this way of making me laugh even on my worst days. We shared stories, talked about our lives, our dreams, and what we wanted out of the future. As days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months, we grew closer. It felt like I had known her forever, even though we'd never met in person. We spent hours texting, video calling, and sharing parts of our lives with each other. And even though we'd never met face to face, I found myself caring for her deeply. It felt like there was this magnetic pull between us, an undeniable connection. There were nights when we'd stay up until the early hours of the morning talking about everything and nothing. The way she made me feel was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It felt real, even though we were miles apart. Eventually, I worked up the courage to tell her how I felt. It wasn't easy. How do you tell someone you've never met in person that you're in love with them? But one night, I couldn't hold it back any longer. I think I'm falling for you, Lily, I told her, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for her response. It took a few moments, but when she replied, she told me that she felt the same way. That night, the world felt right. We had made this connection through the screen, but it felt like it was as real as anything else in the world. The distance didn't matter. We talked about meeting in person, planning the perfect day when we finally would. But there was always something that made her hesitant when the topic came up. She was nervous, she said, but I understood. After all, we were still getting to know each other. It wasn't long before I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I wanted to meet her, to see her face in person, to hold her hand and make everything feel more real than just digital words. So I made plans. I booked a flight, found a nice place for us to meet. I was both excited and terrified at the thought of meeting her for the first time. I couldn't wait, but I couldn't deny the fear that lingered. The fear of not living up to her expectations, or, worse, her not being who I thought she was. The day finally came. I arrived at the airport, and as I made my way to the spot we had agreed to meet, my heart raced. My hands were sweaty. I could hardly breathe. And then there she was, Lily, in the flesh, standing in front of me, just as beautiful as in her pictures. More so, actually. I couldn't help but smile, my heart skipping a beat. I walked up to her, and without thinking, I wrapped my arms around her. It felt like the world had stopped spinning and it was just the two of us. "I can't believe you're really here," I said, my voice shaking a little. "I've been waiting for this moment," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with emotion. We spent the day together, exploring the city, talking, laughing, and just enjoying each other's company. It was everything I had hoped for and more. But as the day wore on, I began to sense that something was off. There were small things, moments where she seemed distracted, or when she would quickly change the topic when certain subjects came up. I brushed it off, thinking maybe she was just nervous, or maybe I was reading too much into it. But by the end of the day, I felt like there was something she wasn't telling me. Later that evening, as we sat on a bench overlooking the city lights, I decided to ask her about it. "You've been acting kind of distant today," I said, my voice gentle but filled with concern. "Is everything okay?" She looked at me, her eyes suddenly filled with hesitation. For a moment, she didn't say anything. I could see the gears turning in her head, as though she was deciding how much to reveal. I have to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something I should have told you sooner." My heart raced and I suddenly felt a pit in my stomach. "What is it, Lily?" She took a deep breath and then it came out. "The truth. I'm not who you think I am," she said, her eyes avoiding mine. "I've been hiding something. Something about me." I was confused. "What do you mean? I don't understand." She looked at me, her eyes filled with regret. "I'm married, on your name. I've been married for a couple of years now. I never wanted you to find out like this, but I didn't know how to tell you. I've been unhappy, and I thought this would be my escape. I thought we could have something real even if it wasn't, but I was wrong." My world seemed to crash around me in that moment. My mind couldn't process what she had just said. She was married all this time. I had been falling for someone who was already committed to someone else. I felt sick, betrayed, and hurt. The person I had fallen in love with wasn't who she had appeared to be. I wanted to yell, to ask her why she had led me on, why she had never told me the truth. But instead I just sat there silent, feeling the weight of her confession press down on me. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I should have told you earlier, but I was scared of losing you. I didn't want to be alone. It was too much." I stood up, feeling dizzy, my head spinning with 1,000 thoughts. I didn't know what to say. "I need some time to think," I told her, my voice barely audible. "I didn't sign up for this." I left her standing there and I walked away, not knowing what to feel. I had just met the woman of my dreams, only to find out she wasn't who she had seemed to be. The love I thought was real was built on lies. How could I trust her now? How could I trust anyone? The next few days were a blur. I stayed in the city trying to clear my head, but all I could think about was her. Her confession haunted me. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been deceived. The girl I had fallen in love with, the one I thought I knew, was a stranger. I didn't know what to do with that. Eventually, I decided to leave. I went back home, trying to put the whole thing behind me. But Lily's face, her voice, and her words stayed with me. Would I ever be able to forgive her? Could we ever have a real relationship knowing what I knew now? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that the person I thought I knew was gone, and in her place was someone who had kept the truth hidden for too long. It all began on a trip I wasn't even sure I wanted to take. I had been stuck in the grind of work, juggling too many projects, and someone from the office suggested, I attend a business seminar in a remote town, somewhere I couldn't even pronounce. It wasn't my idea of an exciting trip, but it seemed important, so I booked the flight. I didn't think much of it beyond the conference itself. But then I met her. It was at the airport when we first crossed paths. She was sitting in the waiting area, reading a book, and I could tell right away she wasn't the kind of person who would notice me. I was wearing the usual bland business attire, lost in the thought of work, while she seemed so at ease, so different, like she belonged to a different world. I hadn't even planned on talking to anyone, but somehow we ended up on the same plane. The flight was long and tedious. I had my nose buried in a presentation I needed to prepare for the seminar, but at one point I couldn't help but glance over at her. She wasn't reading anymore. Instead, she was gazing out the window, looking out at the clouds, her face calm, peaceful. There was something so intriguing about her presence that I couldn't shake off. It was the kind of place where you could easily get lost in your thoughts. But as the flight progressed, something nudged me to start a conversation. We ended up talking about the place we were both traveling to, and somehow the conversation didn't feel awkward. She was a traveler at heart, someone who had been to so many places, but this one was special. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of something that would change my life. Once we arrived in the town, I couldn't stop thinking about her. She was there for leisure, taking a break from her busy life. She wasn't in a rush like I was, and she seemed so free, so unburdened. At the seminar, I found myself distracted by her presence in the crowd. She was always there in the background, yet she felt like the only thing that mattered. There was something magnetic about her. One day after a session, she suggested we explore the town together. At first, I hesitated. I had my meetings, deadlines, work to do, but I realized that being with her, even just for a day, seemed like an adventure I couldn't pass up. And so we did, exploring quaint little cafes, wandering through winding streets, and climbing hills that overlooked the vast horizon. She had a way of making everything seem like a new experience. And soon enough, I found myself forgetting about work, forgetting about the pressures of life. We hiked together to a waterfall one afternoon, laughing and sharing stories, and that was when something changed. I noticed how natural it felt to be with her, how she challenged me in ways I hadn't thought possible. She wasn't just a beautiful face or an interesting person. She was someone who made me feel alive in a way I hadn't realized I was missing. As the days passed, we continued to travel and explore. But there was always this underlying connection that I couldn't deny. Every new challenge we faced, whether it was a missed train or getting lost in a village we had never seen before, brought us closer together. We learned to laugh together in moments of stress, to rely on each other in ways that I never expected. There was one particular evening when we found ourselves stranded in a small town because of a storm. We had no idea where we were going, and everything seemed uncertain, but she never panicked. Her calmness became my anchor, and we managed to find shelter for the night, sitting by the fire and talking until we fell asleep. It was in that moment I realized I didn't want to face the world without her. As our trip neared its end, I knew the hardest part wasn't going to be saying goodbye to the beautiful places or the adventures. The hardest part was going to be saying goodbye to her. We had shared something deeper than just a vacation, something that felt real, raw and undeniable. The day I had to leave, I stood at the airport watching her pack her things. She smiled at me, but I could see the sadness in her eyes. I didn't want to go. I didn't want this journey to end. "I'll see you again, right?" she asked, her voice soft. I wanted to say, of course, but I wasn't sure if that was enough. We had both lived through a whirlwind, and I wasn't ready to let go. After that trip, we kept in touch, but the distance between us was unbearable. We talked about the memories we shared, and it wasn't long before I realized I couldn't just go back to my normal life without her. I couldn't live without the laughter we shared or the way she made me see the world in a different light. I made a decision that felt right but also terrifying. I flew back to her, not for a vacation, not for a weekend, but for something deeper. I asked her to meet me at the place we had first met, at the same cafe where we had started talking, and I told her I couldn't imagine my life without her, and she said yes. We got married a year later, surrounded by the people we loved, in a small ceremony under the stars. It felt surreal, but at the same time it was the most natural thing in the world. We had traveled together, faced challenges, shared our dreams, and built a bond that was stronger than anything I could have ever imagined. Now, as I look back on that trip, the business seminar I never really wanted to attend, the unexpected meeting on that plane, the adventures, the shared moments of vulnerability, I realized that sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead us to exactly where we're meant to be. And I'm so glad that our journey led to this. It all started when I met her. I remember the first time our paths crossed as if it was yesterday. Her name is Aisha. I was at a family friends gathering, just going through the motions, when I saw her standing by the corner, laughing with a group of people. There was something about the way she carried herself, so graceful, so full of life. I was immediately drawn to her, though I didn't have the courage to speak to her right away. She's from a different cultural background than mine. I come from a conservative, traditional family, and I know they expected me to follow in their footsteps, marry someone from our community, from the same cultural heritage, someone with similar values. But when I saw Aisha, something inside me told me that I was looking at something more than just another fleeting attraction. She was different. She didn't belong to my world, but somehow she seemed to fit in mine. It took a while for us to talk, but when we did, it felt like we had known each other for years. Her smile, her warmth, and her willingness to listen to me made me feel like I could be myself, without pretenses. Our conversation started simple, casual at first, but with every moment spent together, we found ourselves opening up more about our lives, our dreams, our fears. We were two souls from different worlds, but when we were together, it felt like nothing else mattered. However, things weren't as simple as they seemed. My family had strong opinions about whom I should marry. We were from a close-knit community, and they believed in preserving our traditions. My parents were proud of our heritage, and for them, the idea of me marrying someone from a different cultural background was inconceivable. They had a vision of my life, and it didn't include someone like Aisha. They thought I was being foolish, that I was just infatuated with the idea of something exotic. On the other side, Aisha faced her own battles. Her family had always been protective, and they had their own expectations for her. Her parents had envisioned her marrying someone from their community, someone with shared customs and language. When they learned about me, they were worried. What would my family think? Would we be able to navigate a relationship that bridged such different worlds? Her family didn't understand why she would want to pursue a relationship that would only bring heartache and struggle. And to be honest, I could see why they felt that way. But despite everything, we couldn't deny our feelings. Aisha and I had something special. Every time I looked at her, I knew she was the one I wanted to spend my life with. And I could see that she felt the same way about me. Yet we were caught in this cultural tug-of-war, torn between love and duty, between following our hearts and staying true to our families and societies. It wasn't easy. I faced the disappointment in my parents' eyes every time they brought up the topic. They would ask me, why her? Why not someone from our own background? Think of the future. Think of the consequences. They didn't see her the way I did. They couldn't understand how she made me feel. Aisha faced similar questions from her parents. They told her that they wanted what was best for her. But how could marrying me be the right choice? We both knew it wasn't going to be a smooth road. But we were patient with each other, with ourselves, and with our families. Slowly, over time, we proved to them that our love was not just a phase, that it was not something temporary. It was real. We made sacrifices, both of us. There were moments when I had to distance myself from certain aspects of my family life to be with her. I had to stand up for our relationship when others questioned it. It wasn't easy to face rejection from people I loved, but Aisha always supported me. And when her family asked her to reconsider, she stayed by my side, reminding me that love meant more than cultural boundaries. There were nights when we cried, unsure of what the future held, but we held on to each other, knowing we were building something beautiful, even if no one else saw it yet. Eventually, our patience began to bear fruit. My family started to see how much I cared for Aisha, how she made me a better person. They began to see the joy in my eyes when I talked about her, and the sincerity in my actions when I chose to be with her. It wasn't an overnight change, but with time they softened. Aisha's family too saw the effort I put into understanding her culture, her values, and her family. I wasn't just someone who wanted her for the sake of it. I was someone who was committed, who would stand by her no matter what. There were difficult conversations with both our families, but over the years, we convinced them that love is not about where you come from, but about the respect, trust, and understanding you share. It was about accepting each other's differences and learning to love in ways that were unique to us. Little by little, they came to realize that love has no boundaries. And then came the day when I asked her to marry me. It wasn't a grand gesture, just a quiet moment between the two of us, sitting by a lake where we had spent so many of our first dates. I told her that through all the struggles, the doubts, and the pain, I knew that she was the one I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. And with tears in her eyes, she said yes. The road to marriage wasn't easy. We had to fight for our love, but in doing so, we learned so much about patience, about commitment, and about sacrifice. Our wedding day wasn't just the joining of two people. It was the joining of two cultures, two worlds that had once seemed so far apart. My family was there, and so was hers. They watched as we exchanged vows, and for the first time, I saw a different kind of acceptance in their eyes. They had come to understand that love, true love, is something that transcends cultural lines. It's something that unites rather than divides. Now, as I stand here, married to the love of my life, I can say that every struggle was worth it. We proved that love is worth fighting for, and no matter where we came from, no matter how different our cultures were, love was the bridge that brought us together. I will forever be grateful for the patience, the sacrifices, and the unwavering belief that we had in each other. We won their acceptance, and in the process, we built something stronger than anything I could have ever imagined. Our love is a testament to the power of patience, sacrifice, and the belief that love knows no boundaries. I remember when I first met her. Her name was Hannah, and she came into the office like a breath of fresh air. New to the team, she had this natural grace about her, a way of carrying herself that caught everyone's attention. I was just another employee at Nihaya, a corporate firm known for its ambitious clientele and relentless pace. But there was something about Hannah. She was different. From the very first day, she made an impression. Not because she was stunning, though. There was that. But because of the way she spoke. Her voice was smooth, confident, with a touch of softness that made you want to listen. She had this uncanny ability to connect with people. And soon enough, she was climbing the corporate ladder, gaining the trust of our clients, especially the higher-ups in the company. I was the quiet, focused guy in the corner of the office, trying to keep my head down and my performance up. But Hannah, she had this energy. She made everything seem effortless, from meetings to presentations. She could make a client feel like they were the most important person in the room, and I couldn't help but admire that. As the weeks passed, she and I started working together more closely. It wasn't intentional at first, but we were assigned to the same projects, often paired up for client meetings. I had no idea what was happening, but a connection started to form between us. It wasn't the kind of connection I had expected, though. There was something deeper, something I couldn't quite place. Her eyes would meet mine for just a little longer than necessary, and there was a warmth to her smile that made my heart race. It felt like a secret, like we were starting to share something special. I thought it was just chemistry, or maybe I was simply falling for her charm. One evening, after a particularly long day of presentations, we found ourselves alone in the office, sorting through last-minute paperwork. She was wearing that soft sweater I'd seen her in a few times, her hair loose around her shoulders. There was an unusual softness to her demeanor as she talked about how stressed she'd been with the workload. I couldn't resist offering to help, and soon, we were talking about more than just work. It felt natural. And then it happened. She leaned in a little closer than usual, her breath warm against my ear as she thanked me for my support. And in that moment, everything clicked. I knew that what I was feeling wasn't just admiration, it was something more. Something I couldn't ignore. Before I knew it, I kissed her. I didn't expect it. It wasn't planned. But I kissed her and she kissed me back. From that night, everything changed. We started seeing each other outside of work. We went to dinner, grabbed coffee, and spent hours just talking. It felt like we had found something special in the midst of all the chaos at Nihaya. She was ambitious, driven, and fiercely independent. I admired those qualities, and I thought she admired my quiet determination. We shared our dreams, our fears, our struggles. It seemed like we were building something real together, but over time I began to notice something that didn't sit right. Hannah's behavior with clients started to shift. She would get a little too friendly with certain key people, especially the wealthy, powerful clients. At first, I brushed it off as just her professional charm, but then it started to feel different. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it felt like she was manipulating the situation, using her attraction to these clients to gain favors, special treatment, and even better deals for the company. One evening, while we were out for dinner, I overheard her talking to one of our clients on the phone. I didn't mean to listen, but she was speaking in such a low voice, and I couldn't help myself. She was promising them favors in exchange for further cooperation. My heart sank. It was subtle, but it was there. She wasn't just using her charm to secure business deals. She was weaving her own personal interests into the mix. When she hung up, I pretended everything was normal. But my mind was racing. The girl I had fallen for, the one I trusted, the one I believed in, wasn't the person I thought she was. She wasn't as innocent as she appeared. Days passed, and I started watching her closely, seeing how she interacted with clients, with colleagues, even with me. There were moments when I felt like I was just another stepping stone for her, a way to further her own career. I couldn't help but feel betrayed. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let myself fall for someone who was playing a dangerous game? The realization hit me like a cold wave. I had been a fool. I had fallen for her, trusted her, let my guard down completely, and for what? To help her climb higher. All the while she was using me to get what she wanted. It was a bitter pill to swallow. I confronted her, and I remember that night clearly. It was late, and we were in her apartment, just the two of us. I asked her about the phone call I had overheard, about her intentions with the clients. She was silent at first, avoiding my eyes, but then she looked at me, and in that moment, I saw the truth in her gaze. "I didn't mean for you to find out this way," she said, her voice softer than usual. "But I've been using every tool I have to get ahead. It's not personal, it's just business." I felt my chest tighten. "So everything we had, everything we shared was just part of your plan?" She hesitated, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. "No, I do care about you. But this is the world we live in. I'm trying to survive, and sometimes I do what I have to. It hurt. It hurt in ways I didn't know were possible, but I knew what I had to do." I told her that I couldn't be a part of her game, that I wasn't going to let myself be used any longer. I walked out of her apartment that night, the weight of it all crushing me. I don't know what happened after that. We still work at Nihaya, but the air between us is different now. I've distanced myself from her, from everything we had. She's still charming, still ambitious, but I can't look at her the same way anymore. I don't regret the time we spent together. In the beginning, I thought I had found something real, but sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes people want more than you're willing to give, and they'll use whatever they can to get it. And in the end, you have to ask yourself if you're willing to be a part of that story. I was 28, just starting to find my footing in life, a few years into my career, and feeling like everything was settling into a predictable routine. Then came this business trip, a week-long conference in the middle of nowhere, a place I'd never even heard of. I didn't know a soul there. Truth be told, I almost skipped it. A few days off seemed like a nice break, but I couldn't afford to fall behind at work. So I packed my bags and headed off. I'll never forget the first time I saw her. I was sitting by the hotel lobby, checking my phone as I waited for a colleague to arrive. It was a sprawling resort tucked away in a beautiful valley. Mountains in every direction, greenery as far as the eye could see. Then she walked in, a girl in a red scarf, smiling as she chatted with the hotel receptionist. She didn't seem like someone from the city, not at all. There was something warm about her, something refreshing, like she belonged in this place, not surrounded by the usual urban chaos. She caught me staring, and to my embarrassment, I quickly looked away. But she smiled and said hi as she passed by. I nodded, too shy to say much. Her smile lingered in my mind, though, long after she left. It wasn't until the next day that we actually talked. I was in the small cafe by the lake, sipping on my morning coffee, when I saw her again. She was sitting outside, sketching in a little notebook, the mountains in the background. There was something about the way she seemed completely at peace in this remote place, unlike the rest of us who were just there for business or leisure. She looked happy. I decided to walk over. My nerves were a mess, but I had to say something. We ended up talking for over an hour, about her art, about the place we were in, about the odd quirks of traveling alone. Her name was Clara. She was a writer, had come here for a personal project. Something about the culture of these mountains and the people who lived there She told me how she'd always dreamed of traveling, of finding the stories that no one else would tell. I was fascinated. Here I was, all caught up in my little corporate world, and she was living the kind of life I'd only ever read about. The kind that felt alive, full of color, full of adventure. We were so different, yet somehow the conversation was easy. The next few days were an adventure I'll never forget. We found ourselves exploring together even though we hadn't planned it. On the second day, she suggested we hike to a village a few miles up the mountain. I almost said no, but there was something in the way she looked at me that made me say yes. We laughed at our missteps on the rocky paths, got lost for a while, and ended up discovering a hidden waterfall. I was sweaty and exhausted, but I didn't want it to end. There was a feeling of connection I hadn't felt before, something unspoken between us but so real. As the days passed, we explored every inch of the place, from the quiet old town with cobblestone streets to the remote cliffs overlooking the vast valley. We ate local dishes, laughed over broken language barriers, and even got caught in a storm once, running for cover in a tiny church on the hillside. It was moments like that, struggling to find shelter together, sharing glances of pure happiness that made me realize something deep inside me was shifting. I was falling for her, and I could see it in her eyes too. She would look at me, and for a moment, there was a quiet understanding between us. The world felt like it was spinning a little slower, giving us time to simply be in that moment. But it wasn't just the fun that brought us closer. There were hard moments too. One night, as we walked back from the village after an exhausting day of hiking, we got caught in a storm. We were both drenched, the wind howling around us, the path slippery and dangerous. We had to help each other climb over rocks, guide each other through the darkness. It felt like a test of sorts, one of those moments that makes you realize how much you rely on someone, even without saying the words. Clara had always been so confident, so independent, but there were times when I saw a vulnerability in her. We stayed up late that night talking about everything and nothing, our words filling the space left by the storm. She told me about her past, her struggles, the times she felt lost, and I shared my own. It was strange being that open with someone, especially a stranger, but there, in the middle of nowhere, it felt like the safest place. By the time the trip came to an end, I knew things had changed. We stood by the lake the night before I had to fly back. The sky was clear, stars scattered across the dark expanse above. Clara turned to me, her face lit by the soft glow of the water. "I don't want this to end," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I could feel the weight of her words, the same feeling I was trying to hide in my chest. "Neither do I said, my heart racing." She looked away as if she were afraid of saying the words out loud. I reached out and touched her arm gently. "We don't have to let it end," I said. It wasn't just about the trip anymore. It was about everything we'd shared. Every laugh, every conversation, every moment that had made me feel like I was alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. And so we did something crazy. We made the decision to try, to let it grow beyond the mountains and the days we spent wandering. We stayed in touch, texting every day, calling and planning future trips. Slowly but surely, what had begun as a fleeting connection became something deeper. There were challenges, of course. The distance, the uncertainty of how things would turn out, but we both knew we had something rare, something that couldn't just fade away. 6 months later, I flew back to see her. I wanted to be there with her, no matter the distance, no matter the complications. And that's when I knew I couldn't live without her. I wanted her by my side, not just for the adventures, but for everything life would bring. We got married a year later. It wasn't some grand wedding, just the two of us at a small chapel by the mountains, surrounded by our closest friends. It was simple, beautiful, and perfect in its own way. And as we exchanged vows, I looked at her, really looked at her, and I realized that this was just the beginning. The world had seemed so big before, but now it was ours to explore together. Our love story started in a faraway place, but it became our story. Every adventure, every challenge, every quiet moment we shared, it all led us here. And I know now that no matter where we go, whether it's on another trip to some far-off place or simply in the quiet of our home, we will always have each other. It all started when I thought I had everything figured out. I was in a relationship, deep in love, or so I thought. We had plans, dreams, a future that seemed set in stone. But it all shattered, crashed, down around me in a way that I couldn't have predicted. She left, and with her, she took everything I thought I knew about love. The betrayal hit hard, deeper than I could explain to anyone. It wasn't just her leaving, it was the way she left. The lies, the deceit, the false promises of forever. It felt like the ground beneath me had crumbled, and I was falling into a void that I couldn't escape. I spent months just existing, trying to put the pieces of my life back together. But every time I tried, I felt like something was missing. Like I was walking around with a heart that didn't know how to beat anymore. I couldn't trust anyone, myself included. How could I? How could I open myself up to love again when it had been twisted into something painful? But then she came into my life. Her name was Sarah. I first met her at a coffee shop. She was sitting by the window reading a book with a cup of tea beside her. There was something about her, something that drew me in despite myself. She wasn't the type I usually went for, but there was a calmness to her, a gentleness that felt safe. I didn't know it then, but that moment was the beginning of everything. We didn't talk right away, but over the next few weeks I kept seeing her there, almost like fate was pushing us together. I would catch glimpses of her smile, her laugh, and something inside me began to stir, though I tried to ignore it. I wasn't ready for another relationship, not yet. The scars from my past were still too fresh. But one day she spoke to me first. "Is this seat taken?" she asked, glancing at the empty chair across from me. I looked up from my book, a little surprised, but smiled and shook my head. "No, it's all yours." She sat down and we started talking. It was easy, too easy. The conversation flowed and I found myself laughing more than I had in months. We spoke about everything, books, music, travel, and somehow, I felt like she understood me in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. She wasn't rushing me, wasn't demanding anything of me. It was just nice. But beneath all that, I couldn't ignore the fear growing inside me. I had no right to ask her to open up to me. No right to ask for anything when my own heart felt so broken. Still, every time we met, it became harder to resist her warmth, her kindness. She had a way of seeing the good in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. I noticed it right away, and it was both comforting and terrifying. I tried to keep my distance. I told myself it was for the best. But one night, after a particularly long conversation about life and love, she turned to me and said, "You don't have to carry the weight of your past alone, you know." Those words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to tell her everything about the betrayal, the heartbreak, the walls I'd built up. But I couldn't, not yet. I was too scared. What if she saw me the way I saw myself? What if she left too? But she didn't. Instead, she just smiled gently, like she understood more than I gave her credit for. And I realized that somehow, without even trying, she had already begun to heal a part of me I didn't even know was still broken. As time passed, our friendship deepened. There were moments of hesitation, moments when I pulled back because my past whispered doubts into my ear. But Sarah, with all her patience and her quiet strength, never pushed me. She just let me be, and in doing so, she made it easier for me to open up, piece by piece. One evening, as we were walking through the park, I stopped and turned to her. "Sarah," I began, my voice unsure, "I need to tell you something. I'm scared." She looked at me with those kind eyes and waited. And then I blurted out everything, the hurt, the betrayal, the walls I had built up to protect myself, and the fear that love wasn't something I could trust anymore. "I know," she said softly. "I can see it in you. But I'm not asking you to forget your past. I'm asking you to let me be part of your future." Her words were like a balm on my wounded heart, but even then I was scared. Could I really do this? Could I risk my heart again? I didn't have an answer right away. But over time, as we spent more days together, I found myself trusting her more. Her love wasn't like the love I had known before. It wasn't full of promises that were broken, or sweet words that hid lies. It was patient, steady, and real. It was the kind of love that didn't ask for perfection, but allowed room for growth, for mistakes, for understanding. We started building something new together, not as two people looking to fill the empty spaces in their hearts, but as two people learning how to love each other without fear. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments when I would pull back, afraid to lose her, afraid to feel the pain again. But every time she was there, waiting, never rushing me, never making me feel less than, and slowly, day by day, I found myself falling in love with her. Not just because of the way she made me feel, but because of the way she made me see myself. She helped me rediscover the parts of me that I thought were lost forever. She taught me that love, when it's real, is about more than just passion. It's about trust, understanding, and the courage to keep going even when you're scared. Eventually, I couldn't imagine my life without her. One evening, as we sat on the same park bench where we had once talked about our fears, I took her hand in mine and looked into her eyes. "Sarah," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I don't know how or when it happened, but I'm in love with you. And I trust you. With everything. My heart, my past, my future." She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes, and whispered, "I love you too." From that moment on, there was no more fear. We built a life together. A marriage full of trust, full of understanding, and full of love that was stronger than anything I had ever known. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. We had learned to build trust, brick by brick, and with each passing day, we strengthened the bond that had started out as just a flicker of hope. Looking back, I realized that love isn't just about finding the right person. It's about being the right person. Someone who is willing to heal, to grow, and to trust again. Sarah didn't just save me from my past. She showed me how to embrace the future with open arms, and I will spend the rest of my life proving to her that the love we built is one that will last forever. It all started in my first year at university. I was just a regular guy. Not popular, not too shy, somewhere in between. My name's Alex, by the way. The first day I walked into that massive lecture hall, I felt like just another face in a sea of strangers. The nerves were overwhelming. Everyone seemed to know where they were going, what they were doing. But then there she was. Her name was Emily. She sat 2 rows ahead of me, her dark brown hair cascading over her shoulders, a little messy in a charming way. I remember noticing how she always had a book in her hand even before class started. It was one of those details that just stuck with me. The kind of person who was always prepared, always with something in her hands to keep her occupied but still present. I wasn't sure if she noticed me, but every day we would walk into the same room and find ourselves seated near each other, sometimes by chance, sometimes not. It wasn't love at first sight. Not in the way you see in movies, with hearts flying around and fireworks. No, ours was much quieter, much more gradual. The first time we actually spoke was about an assignment. I had no clue what was going on with the project, and she was sitting right next to me. I didn't even mean to ask her for help, but she noticed I was struggling. "Need some help?" she asked, looking at me with that warm, genuine smile that made everything feel less intimidating. I probably looked like a deer caught in headlights, but I nodded anyway. We spent the next 10 minutes working through the project together. That was the start. From then on, we began to sit next to each other more frequently, sometimes even during study sessions at the library. We'd talk about everything, the classes, of course, but also our dreams and what we wanted from life. She told me she wanted to write a novel someday, and I remember thinking how cool that was. Me? I just wanted to make a difference in the world. Maybe go into engineering, but honestly, I wasn't even sure at the time. I had this vague idea of what I wanted but couldn't quite grasp it. Weeks passed and our friendship grew. There were moments of laughter, moments of silence, moments where it was just easy to be around her. I could always count on her for support, whether it was helping me cram for exams or talking me through the frustration of a tough assignment. She made me believe in myself a little more, and she had this way of making everything seem lighter, even when the pressure of school was suffocating. But it was more than just friendship. It was the little things. The way her eyes lit up when she was talking about something she was passionate about. The way she could make even the most boring class seem interesting. The way she always knew how to make me laugh when I was stressed out. I started to realize that my feelings for her were more than just platonic. I felt drawn to her in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just her beauty, though that was certainly a part of it. It was her mind, her heart, her kindness. I felt like I had found someone who understood me, someone who saw me for who I really was. The moment I realized I was in love with Emily came during the final year of college. It had been a long journey, filled with ups and downs, and we were approaching graduation. We had both grown in ways I never anticipated. But it wasn't just the end of school that made me realize it. It was the way she looked at me that day. We had been studying for our last big exam together. She was sitting across from me, focused, but every so often she'd glance up and give me this smile, the kind that made everything feel right in the world. That day when she smiled at me, I knew. It wasn't just a smile, it was something deeper, something that spoke of years of shared moments, trust and mutual respect. It felt like time had slowed down and everything around us faded away. I knew then that I didn't just want to be her friend anymore. I wanted to be with her for as long as I could. But I also knew it wasn't the right moment to say anything. She had her own path to follow, her own dreams to chase, and I didn't want to pressure her. As graduation day approached, I couldn't ignore the growing ache in my chest. I had to tell her how I felt. So on the night before graduation, I asked her to meet me at the campus park, the place we had spent so many late nights talking and laughing during our years at school. The sun had just set, casting a soft glow over everything. I remember feeling nervous as I waited for her, pacing back and forth, my heart pounding. I thought about all the things that could go wrong. The awkwardness, the chance she wouldn't feel the same way. But as soon as she arrived, all that melted away. She looked at me, that same familiar warmth in her eyes. "I have something to tell you," I said, my voice shaky, trying to find the right words. She tilted her head slightly, her curiosity piqued. "What is it, Alex?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I know it's not easy to say, but I can't keep it inside any longer. I think I'm in love with you, Emily. I have been for a while now." For a moment, she didn't say anything. It was like the world had stopped. My heart was racing, my palms sweating, waiting for her response. Finally, she smiled softly, and then in that sweet, calm voice of hers, she said, "I was hoping you'd say that." Everything in me exhaled in relief, and I felt like I could breathe again. We talked for hours that night, about everything, our fears, our hopes, our future. And that was the beginning of something new. Over the next few years, we faced so many challenges, but we also grew closer. There were times when I was unsure about the next step in my career, when Emily struggled to finish her novel or deal with the realities of life after school. But we supported each other through it all, always reminding each other of the dreams we had when we first met. We took trips together, celebrated small victories, and even got through the hard times when things felt like they were falling apart. I knew I had found my person, someone I could rely on, someone who made me a better version of myself. And when the time came, when everything felt right, I asked her to marry me, in the same park where it all began. Her answer was a simple yes, and that was all I needed. Now looking back, it seems like everything fell into place. From the nervous first day at university to the day we said our vows, everything led to this. We had started as strangers, became friends, and then grew into something more. The path wasn't always easy, but it was ours. We had faced the challenges of academic life, the pressures of graduation, and the uncertainty of what came next. But through it all, we held on to each other, and it made us stronger. Today, we are partners not just in love, but in life. And every day I am thankful for the simple moment when we met in that classroom. Two people just trying to find their way, and somehow, finding each other along the way. It started like a dream, everything falling into place with her. I remember when we first met, and it was like a spark. She was everything I thought I wanted, kind, funny, beautiful, and most of all, she looked at me like I was the only person in the world. It didn't take long for us to fall in love, to make promises we thought would last forever. Every moment with her felt like it was meant to be, and I couldn't imagine a future without her by my side. But as time went on, something began to shift. I could feel it, like a faint crack spreading across something once whole. At first, I couldn't put my finger on it. Little things started to change. The way she would pull away when I reached for her. The way she looked at her phone with an urgency I hadn't seen before. She became more distant, and I started to feel it deep in my chest. The love I thought was unbreakable began to feel fragile, as though it was slipping through my fingers. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that maybe life was just getting in the way. And she had a lot on her mind. After all, she was busy, right? But the doubt was like a seed, planted in the back of my mind, growing stronger with each passing day. I found myself asking questions I never thought I'd have to ask. "Are you okay? Why are you so distant?" I could see the hesitation in her eyes when I asked, and that only made the doubt grow. There was a day, one particular day, that I'll never forget. She'd been distant all week, like she was a ghost in the room with me. We hadn't talked properly in days. She'd been busy at work, or so she said. But I noticed how she avoided my gaze when I asked about her day. I had this nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Then came the phone call. She had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went to take a shower. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but that day, I don't know what came over me. It was almost like something was pushing me to check it. I know, it was wrong, but I did it. I looked through her messages. It wasn't the first time I had looked at her phone, but it was the first time I felt like I needed to, like there was something hiding just beneath the surface. What I found made my heart stop. There, right in front of me, was a message from someone else. I didn't recognize the name at first, but when I saw their exchanges, I felt like I had been punched in the gut. It wasn't just the casual talk between friends. No, these messages were personal, intimate. She had been lying to me all along. She had been seeing someone else. The person she was messaging, they'd talked about meeting up, about things I had never even dreamed of her sharing with anyone else. And the worst part? She had been doing it for months. I felt sick. I could hardly breathe. All the doubts, all the small things I had ignored, they came rushing back to me like a tidal wave, crashing over every memory, every shared moment we had. Every time she told me she loved me, every kiss, every promise, it felt hollow now. I wasn't her priority. I never had been. I was just a fool who had been blind to the truth. When she came out of the shower, I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to confront her, to ask her why she had done this to me, but the words felt stuck in my throat. She looked at me, her face soft and unaware of what I had discovered. But the moment our eyes met, I saw something in hers. Guilt, maybe. A flicker of fear. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Who's he?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her face went pale. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at me, as though she hadn't expected me to find out. Then the truth came out, slowly, painfully. She had been seeing him for months. She told me he was just a friend at first, but things had escalated. She said she didn't know how it happened, that she never meant for it to go this far, but none of that mattered. The truth was, she had cheated on me, and I wasn't enough for her. The pain was indescribable. It wasn't just about her being with someone else. It was the betrayal, the lies, the years I had spent with someone who wasn't even honest with me. The love I thought was real had been a facade, and I had been too blind to see it. I didn't know what to do after that. I wanted to leave, to walk out and never look back. But I couldn't. I was stuck, torn between the love I still felt for her and the anger that was bubbling inside me. How could she do this? How could she look me in the eyes every day and pretend everything was fine, knowing she was betraying me? We argued for hours. She cried, said she was sorry, but none of it changed what had happened. I felt like I was drowning in her apologies, but they meant nothing to me anymore. I couldn't trust her, not after everything. My world felt like it had collapsed. How do you go on loving someone who has shattered your heart into 1,000 pieces? In the end, I left. I couldn't stay there. Not with all the lies and the broken trust hanging in the air. She begged me to stay to work things out, but I couldn't. I had to leave. Now looking back, I wonder if I ever really knew her at all. Was the love we shared ever real? Or was I just a chapter in her life she decided to move on from? The doubts that once crept into my mind have turned into a bitter reality. And though I've tried to move on, to heal, the scar of that betrayal will always remain. It's a wound that time can't quite close, no matter how much I want it to.